Hey everybody, welcome back to Ringside Regression. I'm your host, George the Flesh, and with me, of course, as always, is Jack. Um, kind of the wave of the trade deadline has died off a little bit now. I think we're what 2 weeks out from the deadline, something like that, week and a half. When was the trade
Mhm.
deadline again? I don't know. It's a week and a half ish. I think is
March
about
7th.
the March 7th. Yeah, so about a week and a half. Um, week and a bit. I don't know. I don't know dates. It's confusing. Everything's molding together. It's exam season. I don't know what I'm talking about. But now that the dust is kind of settled for that, we're really in the playoff push time of the year, and we have two pretty interesting wildcard races. Um, in both the East and the West. I think the East one is a little bit more interesting. I think there's more serious teams in the East race, but we're going to talk about both those today. We're also going to talk a little bit about awards, and I kind of want to open with that. Um, because the award, specifically the Hart Trophy, I think the Hart Trophy is really interesting this year because you have basically a three-horse race now. It's McKinnon, Hellebuck, and Draisaitl. I think are the three, and Connor Hellebuyck's getting a lot of love, and rightfully so. He's been easily the best goalie in the league. I think he's going to run away with the Vezina. He might be the first unanimous Vezina winner that we've had in a while. I think can't remember the last time that's happened. So like, it, he's pretty clearly going to be the best goalie in the league. But the Leon Draisaitl thing is really interesting to me because of just how bad McDavid's been compared to Connor McDavid's standards. And if you look at Leon Draisaitl's totals, I found this out. They're talking about it on the PDO cast like a couple weeks ago, I think. They might have talked about it sooner after that too, but I just wanted to I double check the numbers to see if they were still um, similar. And Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, when they're playing together, which hasn't happened a ton this year, but when it has, they've outscored opponents 29-18. They have a 66.11 Corsi for percentage and a 66.26 expected goals for percentage. So absolutely incredible. Like when you're over in the 60s in both of those, you're dominating play pretty well, and they're almost in the 70s. So it's been pretty crazy when they've been playing together. Um, Leon Draisaitl without Connor McDavid, 31 goals for, 25 goals against, 54.27 Corsi for, and 55.89 expected goals for. So still very dominant. The thing that really stuck out to me was Connor McDavid without Leon Draisaitl. 56.25 Corsi for percentage, so a little bit higher than the 54.28 that Draisaitl's putting up by himself. 54.4 expected goals for percentage, so about a point and a half lower than Draisaitl. 26 goals for, 37 goals against. That is insane to me. That the Edmonton Oilers are a net negative team in terms of goals when Connor McDavid's on the ice without Leon Draisaitl. Like, and by a significant margin, like 26-37 is not a small margin. That was astounding to me when I saw that. And it's really hard to look like the best player on your team, period. It's even harder to look like the most important player on your team when you're playing with the best player in the world. And Leon Draisaitl's done that this year by far. And I get the argument for McKinnon because obviously losing Mikko Rantanen and all the turmoil they went through with that roster. But he's had Cale Makar the whole year. I get the Connor Hellebuyck argument because his numbers have been astounding. But the thing with goalies for me is really weird because I feel like if you're a goalie, you have to put up like all-time legendary numbers to be in the Hart conversation just because like the de facto pick for most valuable position in hockey is going to be goalie every year. And I think the Jets as a team have been good enough that they'd still be a very good team if they had like league average goaltending. The fact that Leon Draisaitl is putting up these kind of numbers and McDavid has looked fairly pedestrian by comparison gives the edge to me for Leon Draisaitl in the Hart conversation. I'm interested to kind of know where your thoughts are on the Hart conversation. And I think that there really isn't a wrong answer here. I think all three have pretty compelling cases. But for me, as of right now, unless something crazy happens in the next 16, 17 games, my vote would probably go to Leon Draisaitl.
No, and you're definitely right. There is no real correct answer. All three candidates are phenomenal this season, and it's been a fun race. However, I will say to sort of explain the McDavid's underwhelming season, I would point that towards him being in the league for so long now and teams just sticking two guys on him. So when
Sure.
McDavid and Draisaitl go on the ice together, you have both of them to worry about opposed to one. And I think teams have just become so hyper focused on defending McDavid compared to Draisaitl that this is why McDavid sees the game open up for him when he's on the ice with another superstar close to his caliber. And I definitely do agree with you on that argument about Draisaitl. He's never been this historical 5-on-5 demon that sort of dominates that play. And that situation, he's been more of that power play specialist, kind of sort of riding behind McDavid. But this year, that's completely changed. He's looked like arguably the best 5-on-5 player in the NHL. And also his defensive game continues to improve each and every year. And he has looked fantastic. And he's my heart pick as well for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Connor Hellebuyck is probably the number 2 on my ballot. And I think it's fairly close, but yeah, I think Draisaitl's just kind of put himself over the top a little bit. And I mean, Nathan MacKinnon's not getting enough love, I don't think, like he's very much just the third guy in that conversation right now. And I mean, obviously he's third on my ballot too, but like I feel like he needs to get a lot more recognition. Like he's looked incredible this year, and he was incredible last year too, obviously. So like the Nathan MacKinnon hype needs to kind of build up, and maybe a good playoff run will help that. Unfortunately, they're probably going to run to Dallas in the first round, which might end his playoffs early. But regardless, I think that's important. One last note on Draisaitl I think is really interesting. If you look from, I just want to make sure I get the numbers right, from 18-19 onward, right? 82 games, 50 goals. The next season's 43 and 71, so on pace for 50. Then 31 and 56, another year where he was on pace for 50, and COVID kind of shut that down. 55 goals and 80, 52 goals and 80, 41 and 81 last year, and then 49 and 67 this year. The baseline for Leon Draisaitl has been 50 goals the last like 6 years. That's insane. Like that is insane numbers for a first line, for like really a first line center. Like you don't see that. Like usually your goal scorers are going to be your wingers, right? Like you talk about like, I mean, Stamkos played a bit of center too, but like, you know, Alex Ovechkin, winger, pure scorer kind of thing. Like the fact that you have a guy like this who is putting up really strong defensive numbers, who is a great playmaker, and his baseline has just been 50 goals every season. And the one year that he wasn't on pace for 50 goals, he put up 65 assists and had 106 points. Like Leon Draisaitl has a legitimate argument to be if you're not going to put him ahead of McDavid, totally the second best hockey player in the world. Like pretty legitimately, there's a really strong case for that. And his numbers just have been insane. And I'm kind of sick of hearing he only gets carried by McDavid argument. Because even when McDavid's been out and playing bad, Leon Draisaitl's just looked incredible. And he's looked incredible for a number of years now. And I will defend Leon Draisaitl to the ends of the earth until he starts playing bad. But
now, where do you throw MacKinnon in that conversation? Is it time to have the discussion of having MacKinnon over McDavid after the past 2 years, year and a half?
Maybe. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to having like Draisaitl, MacKinnon, McDavid as my top 3 in that order. I don't hate that at all. I think that there's a very good argument for all 3 of them to be in that conversation. And that's really fun to me because like McDavid's a generational all-time great player. And the fact that there's 2 other players playing right now that can be in the discussion to be the best player in the world at the same time is so much fun. Because like during the Sidney Crosby era, right? Like if you think back to prime Crosby, like there were people that were saying Ovechkin was better, but like that wasn't like we weren't having serious discussions about that, right? Like there was never really a like Alex Ovechkin is clearly the best player in the world. He's so much better than Crosby, like debate, right? There was a couple voices saying like, oh, but he's a better goal scorer. But other than that, there really wasn't much of a case for Ovechkin. We're living in a time right now where we have 3 guys who are very much in that conversation, and a fully healthy Austin Matthews putting up unreal numbers might be able to sneak himself into that conversation too. I'm not ready to go there quite yet because he's really only had the one truly phenomenal season, like best player in the world season. But he's clearly not 100% right now. So like, it's so much fun that we have these guys. And this isn't a shot at McDavid at all. This is a praising of 2 other players to be playing at the same kind of level. And it just so happens that one of them's on his team. And that's like incredible. So yeah, I'm not trying to like shit on McDavid here. That's not the point. But the fact that we have 3 guys in this realm right now is really cool.
I think it's crazy too that Draisaitl is still only making $8.5 million a year, and that's
Yeah.
about to change going into next season. So
Oh my God, yeah. Uh, that's crazy. He's gonna be a like maybe 2-time MVP, and he won an MVP, right? I'm not crazy.
yeah, he
I
did.
think he won a heart. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
What was it?
Um,
2020, I believe he won it. The
I
COVID,
believe so. Yeah. Yes.
right before COVID, he won
I
it.
believe. Yeah. I think that's right. Um, yeah. I mean, he's making $8 million a year, so that's that's pretty crazy to me. Quickly on another award. I think the only other award that's really it's really fascinating to me is the Calder. Um, it's kind of like a 4-horse race for the Calder right now. I think like you have Hudson and Celebrini up there. Dustin Wolf has really good case, and Michkov, who's kind of teetering off on that ballot a little bit, but like the four of them are really fascinating. Um, Especially if Calgary misses the playoffs, I don't think they're going to give it to Dustin Wolf just because of like the fear of giving it to goalies to begin with. Um, Celebrini would probably be my pick right now. I think Hudson probably gets it just because the positional value, but I think Celebrini has been a better overall player. I think it's really interesting that there's a world where Dustin Wolf finishes higher in Vezina voting than he does in the Calder. Like, I think that's a legitimate thing that could happen this year, and that's so funny to me. I'm wondering what your pick is for the Calder, and if you're kind of in the same boat.
Right now, I'm leaning Celebrini just because of what he's been able to do and the impact he's had on a terrible Sharks team, and
Yeah,
including the maturity that we've seen from him in his first season, being able to play a full 200 feet and nearly at a point per game pace
yeah,
is just absolutely incredible considering there's no weapons around him. Lane Hudson is another good pick. I think he might emerge as the favorite and the clear winner if Montreal is able to sneak into the playoffs, which is still
that's true
very
too.
possible. And like you said, the positional value, having a defenseman ranking, I believe he's top 10 in defensive scoring,
I think so.
would
Yeah,
would be
he's first in
incredible
rookie
for a
scoring.
rookie. Yeah, but even at the position, if he's top 10 and
Yeah,
Montreal gets that wild card spot, that would be incredible. And then Matvei Bichkov's looked solid lately as well. He's looked a lot better out of the Four Nations. He's been one of the top point getters since the
mm,
resume of play after the 2 week break. So I don't think he'd be my finalist. I think I'd have the other three over him. But the fact that you have a guy like Michkov outside the final three in this year just shows how stacked this rookie draft class is, because any other year this guy is automatically in the top three, and some years the clear favorite.
oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think playing Philly kind of hurts Michkov a little bit too, just because the style they play and the fact the team's not very good. Like at least with San Jose, like their PR team has done a fantastic job, like making it look like Celebrini's having a lot of fun. Uh, and unfortunately for somebody like Connor Bedard, the Blackhawks haven't really done that because you have videos of him like looking really upset on the bench and stuff, and then you have Celebrini and Will Smith having sleepovers with Tyler Toffoli. So it's like the duality of it, even though like the Sharks are lower them in the standings, is really funny. Uh, that was a hilarious story, by the way. Like the Tyler Toffoli sleepover was iconic, and I'm really glad that we got to experience that alongside them. And it seems like he's always been like a really good locker room guy from every team that he's been on, and I like that signing when it happened, although it was a bit of an overpayment. It was a justified overpayment because San Jose is not going to be very good, and they needed players that are going to help create a culture, as we talked about with Buffalo. Yes, or last week, creating a culture is important, but you have to get the right pieces to do it. It seems like Tyler Foley's been a good addition to that team, and that was just the picture of them all sleeping in the room together. It's really funny.
Yeah, too bad Mike Greer's gonna flip him for a first and a second at the 2026 trade deadline.
Yeah,
So
probably. And fair enough. Uh, it's also crazy that Celebrating and Will Smith are bunking together because like in the NHL, like you don't usually do that. It's not super common. Um, but they're both kids and they're like best friends, and it's great. And they both looked really. Will Smith looked really good too. Shout out
yeah,
to Will
he's been
Smith. He's been
fantastic
fantastic as
recently.
well. So, yeah, San Jose, get yourself a true number one defenseman, and you might have something there. Like there's a lot of talent in San Jose, and Greer's done a really good job building that team. So, uh, moving into the playoff races now. We'll start with the West. Like the West is a little bit more defined. I think the favorite to get the spot is in the spot right now, with the Vancouver Canucks at 67 games played, 73 points. The Blues have 73 points in 68 games played. The Flames are only at 65 games played. They have 71. And the Utah Hockey Club 67 games played at 71. So all pretty close. Calgary technically has the points or the advantage in points percentage, but I like Vancouver. I think Vancouver is just a more stable roster. Like the Flames are 32nd in goals for, and they're getting carried by a rookie goalie, and I don't trust that. For as good as Dustin Wolf's been, you can really see the end of the season. If he has to play pretty much every game from here on out, we could really see him kind of crash. Just based on what other young goalies have done in these situations, especially when your team's literally scoring at the lowest per game rate in the NHL. That's a lot of pressure on a goalie, right? When if you allow 2 goals, the game's pretty much over. I like Vancouver. I think Utah might be my pick to finish 9th. But I think the injuries have just kind of, from the beginning of the year, have kind of hurt them. And then Calgary and St. Louis could battle out for 10 and 11. That's how I see this falling out. Who do you have as the 8 seed? Assuming Minnesota's going to be at 7. Like, I'm just allowing that to be a thing.
Yeah, I'm assuming Minnesota locks up 7 as well. And I'm actually going to say Utah or St. Louis gets that 8 spot. I don't think Vancouver's going to get it. Utah had that humongous win last night over in Vancouver, too.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a fun game to watch. I did watch some of it, but I really like St. Louis's chances as well now. 68 games played. They're at 73 points, tied with Vancouver. Despite having a game in hand, they're 7-2-1 in their last 10 and have won 2 straight. Jim Montgomery's completely transformed this team, and they've been hot lately, and I think they got hot at the right time. Another thing to note, too, is 3 of these teams, Vancouver, St. Louis, and Utah, are all pretty solid road teams. So if
That's
these
true
teams,
too, yeah.
if one of these 3 teams is going to sneak into the playoffs, I don't think it'll be the Calgary Flames just because of the goal scoring inconsistencies. I think that's going to come back to bite them here in the last 15 games. But going back to the point about being on the road, they might be able to put up a decent fight if these solid road teams can figure stuff out here. So I think it's going to be one of Utah or St. Louis. I think Utah is just a fascinating play style of sort of transitioning up the ice quickly, and they're able to drive down hills so fast, and they have guys like Clayton Keller and Logan Cooley that I'd be really excited to watch in a playoff series. And I just think the coaching of the St. Louis Blues and some of the experience they have will kind of put them in a spot and thrust them past Vancouver. I think for Vancouver, it's been just such a wild season for them with all the change and the trades. I just think they're so discombobulated, and I don't think this is their year to make the playoffs.
I just think that like the resurgence of Elias Pettersson over the last 2 weeks has been really encouraging. For Vancouver, that's kind of what I'm banking on. I also kind of trust their goaltending the most out of these teams. And even that's kind of a question mark. But all these teams have significant question marks. I think if I'm the Winnipeg Jets, I would least want to see the Blues of these 4 teams.
Agreed.
Just because like it's a division rival, obviously, but just in the fact that I think that the Blues might have the best matchup players for Winnipeg. They definitely have the best center depth of the 4. And I think that's where the Jets really struggle, and they didn't address that at the deadline. So I think if I'm Winnipeg, I think Calgary is probably the number 1 team I'd rather see, because I think you can outscore the Dustin Wolf effect, and you don't have to outscore them by much because Calgary's not going to put up very many goals. So if I was ranking these opponents based on who the Jets, I'm assuming the Jets win the West, it would probably be Calgary, Utah, Vancouver, St. Louis would be how I'd rank it, and Utah and Vancouver can kind of interchange at 2 and 3. But I think just the inexperience of Utah would put them ahead of Vancouver for me. In terms of if the Jets had to pick an opponent. But Calgary, I think, is probably their most likely or the most wanted opponent. And right now they're leading in points percentage. So that's good for them. Quickly before we move to the East, if you're Colorado, how much are you considering just losing the rest of your games so you play in the Pacific for the so you finish as wild card 1 and you have to play through the Pacific bracket instead? Like, is that...
Yeah, this Dallas offense is just waves and waves of elite talent and versatility, speed, size, skill, you name it, they have it. That right side of the defense is still weak, but I think they're going to be able to outscore all their problems. And they also have one of the best goaltenders in the league in Jake Ottinger. So they'll get the goaltending. And if Miro Heiskanen is able to come back, this team is going to be really dangerous. That game last night was really exciting too. Down 3-1, Dallas scores 2 goals late in the third, and Colorado was able to put it away in overtime with a goal from Cale Makar. But if that's just a glimpse of what we're going to see in a first round matchup, I'm super excited to watch that one.
I'm just like, the thing that worries me about Dallas, and I mean, obviously They have time to figure it out. And I think it's really funny that Mikko Rantanen his PDO just bounced back like the second he left Carolina. I think that's just hilariously on brand. But the thing that worries me a little bit about Dallas, I think their blue line really got exposed in the game against Winnipeg. And just how poor this blue line is, especially on the right side. You really don't have you have Essen Lindell having to be your primary puck carrier on a pair with Cody Ceci. That's just not what you want as your second pair. And Thomas Harley's kind of getting left on an island playing with Lyubushkin. And I mean, the third pairing is just awful. So it does worry me a little bit. As much as I believe that the offense could outscore a lot of their issues, the blue line does legitimately worry me. And I think in both the Winnipeg and Colorado game, you kind of saw that getting exposed a little bit. And I'd just be concerned in a 7-game series that this blue line just wouldn't be able to hold up against those two teams. And that was a concern going in. Obviously, when you're playing against Colorado, I think the offense getting them through it is a little bit more likely than it is against Winnipeg. But again, we've seen Connor Hellebuyck fall apart in the playoffs before, so who knows? But I do think that it's more of a concern for me now after watching those two games than it was the day after the trade deadline.
Yeah, that's very fair. Once you've seen it in action too, as opposed to on paper.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also really funny that like I said, the PDO comeback of Mikko Rantanen immediately after he leaves Carolina is hilarious to me.
Oh yeah, and the shooting talent was absurdly bad individually for him. I have one of those line mate shooting talent databases I made, and it was a 200-minute threshold, so he just met that with the 13 games he played in Carolina. And
yeah,
out of all the forwards in the NHL, he ranked like 7th last this season in shooting talent per 60 at 5-on-5. So just speaks volume to how unlucky he is just to see a player of that caliber and skill in the bottom 10.
I also think it's so on brand for the Nashville Predators that Mark Jankowski leads players in who were traded at the deadline in goals so far. Just because it's another thing that Barry Trotz got rid of and then immediately worked out somewhere else. So the Mark Jankowski come up is something to be studied on the fourth line in Carolina, because it's been, I think he has like 4 goals or something. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So he's
got good underlyings. I like him.
Yeah, but it's hilarious how like he leaves Nashville and suddenly he becomes like this great player, and Barry Trotz looks like he gets like fleeced again, and it's just everything that Nashville touches just never works out, and it's just, I don't know, that was really funny to me. Moving on to the Eastern race, I think the Eastern race is a lot more fascinating. Although Ottawa has kind of separated themselves as the number 1 team. Currently, the Canadiens hold the number 2 wild card in terms of points percentage. But in terms of points, the race goes the Senators obviously with 77 in 66 games. They seem pretty locked into a playoff spot at this point. 68 games for the Rangers, 72 points. 66 for the Canadiens with 71. 66 for the Blue Jackets with 70. 67 for the Red Wings with 70. And then the Islanders and Bruins kind of trailing behind there with 66 games and 68 respectively, with 68 points both. Pittsburgh, I think, is pretty much out. Just they have too many teams to leapfrog. Yeah. Even Boston and the Islanders, I'd say, are probably out of that discussion as well, just based on how
I'm still leaving the Islanders in the race. Boston, I'm knocking out. Islanders, I still keep it in the race a little bit.
Fair enough. But I just think like there's a lot of teams the Islanders have to jump. They have to go on a crazy run. Of these teams, the team I would most like to get in just off of vibes is the Blue Jackets. I think the Rangers are pretty clearly the best roster of this like group of 4 or 5 teams, depending if you count the Islanders in it. But I like, again, very similar to Vancouver, I think there's a lot of dysfunction on that team this year, and I have question marks about them being able to kind of like dial it in for the next 20-ish games, 15 games, and make that push. You have a lot of, and like, I think the thing that scares me about the Rangers is just how young the teams around them are and how hungry those teams would be to get into the playoffs, right? Because it's not like you have a bunch of teams that have been in the playoffs a bunch of times, right? Like Montreal hasn't been in the playoffs since the Cup run. Columbus hasn't been in the playoffs in years. Detroit hasn't been in years. All those teams are younger and are maybe more hungry for that moment because they haven't got there yet. And although that does bring inexperience, I think it's also something that could potentially benefit those teams compared to a team that's a little bit more dysfunctional this year in the Rangers.
I have an interesting argument for you. I was watching the Rangers game last night, and part of me wondered, is the roster they have now better than the team they had last year?
Maybe.
Like, just think about it
JT
for
Miller.
a
Like, I
second.
don't think it's not. I don't think it's like objectively worse for sure.
Just think about it. Their defense, you get rid of arguably their worst defenseman, Ryan Lindgren, and you're
Mhm.
giving Zach Jones those minutes. That's considered an upgrade to me at the level that Lindgren's been at the last year and a half.
Sure.
Jacob Trouba hasn't really been the best. I think Will Borgen's time in New York has looked a little bit better than Trouba over the last year.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say. Keandre Miller is just relatively the same. Adam Fox playing relatively the same. And I mean, in terms of the bottom pair, you still have Braden Schneider there. And as your 60, Eric Gustafsson is a downgrade compared to Earl Vakanainen, or rather vice versa. Vakananen's a downgrade to Gus.
Yeah.
But you have the same goaltending tandem. You have a very similar forward core. And you add JT Miller to this as opposed to Filipino. So
Yeah.
if you ask me, this is pretty upgraded. This team is slightly better, and I just think it really points to one, how the goaltending has completely fluctuated, and two, just like the vibe and the attitude around the arena, and more so the PDO of it as well. It's just
Yeah. Quickly, I don't know if you know the answer to this. I'm kind of curious to see. I read this. This was in the Athletic a couple days ago, and I thought it was fascinating. Over the last 3 seasons, who are the top 5 goalies in goals saved above expected? I'll let you
okay.
just rifle names off.
Rifle names. Let's see. We
Top
got
5.
Hellebuck for sure.
Connor Hellebuyck's number 1.
Igor number 2 is my guess.
Igor's 3.
Okay, 3. Who else do I want to say? Is this all situations?
Yes. Just goals saved above expected. Like purely.
And which
the gap
model
between
is
2 and
this?
3 is pretty close. This is evolving hockey. The gap between 2 and 3 is pretty close.
I'm gonna go
And the gap
Saros in the
between-
top 5.
Saros is number 6.
Okay, so right there.
So he's up there.
Sorokin, I'm gonna have. He had that one monster year.
Sorokin's 3 or 2. Sorokin's at 2.
Okay, so I'm 3 for 4, but the 6. Okay, 4 and 5. Who do I want to go with?
One of them won a Vezina in the last 3 years.
One that.
I guess there's only one other goalie that's won a Vezina in the last 3 years you haven't named yet.
I don't think Vasilevsky's there.
No. Vasilevsky is 9.
Not Fleury won the Vezina in 21, so it's not him. Or do I want to say Fleury?
It's not Fleury.
Because it's 5 years.
The last 3 seasons.
I'm blanking on the one Vezina winner.
Linus Ullmark is 4.
Okay, I did forget about that.
Number 5. Yeah, I want to set this up. The number 5 goalie in the last 3 seasons in goals saved above expected.
It's an off-brand name. I know it is. Who do I want to guess? Is it Dostal?
Samuel Montembeault.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw a post today about how hot he's been recently.
He's been good. He was really good last year too. I was banging the drum for Montembeault, and I did it in my Montreal Canadiens preview too. I was very high on him, and he has been phenomenal this season. He had a bit of a lull right before the Four Nations, but other than that, like, he's been really good, and it gives me a lot of faith that a team like Montreal, who's so young, has a goalie who has been so consistently reliable for the last 3 years, even despite the fact he doesn't get any love for it. Like, he's had, especially the last 2 years, like last year he was really good too. That could be, like, of the group outside of the Rangers, like, by far, I trust Montembeault over the other goalies in that race, except for maybe Sorokin, but Sorokin's been a little hot and cold this year. And the Islanders are, like, far enough down that I think the gap between Montreal and the Islanders in the standings can be made up by the goaltending difference. I think that's a big deal, and it's a bigger deal than a lot of people are going to make out of it. But especially compared to Detroit and Columbus, I'm taking Montembeault by a mile, and that's just really fascinating to me. And I think that could be a really big X factor coming down the stretch here, as these teams fight for that final wildcard spot.
If we zoom a
And
little
then,
further outside of the playoff race too, he's only on the first year of a 3-year deal where he's making $3.1 million
yeah,
a year. So
that's a really like even if he drops off a little bit, even if he falls to like 10th or 12th on this list at the end of next year, like $3 million for that? Hell yeah, sign me up for that. Like that's
and
excellent value in your
there's
goaltender.
also time for regression too. If he had two really good back-to-back seasons and then next year and the year after he doesn't look great, okay,
Yeah,
then you're not going to lock him up long term. You're not going to give him that Vejmelka,
yeah,
Aiden Hill kind of contract that were recently signed.
yeah. And I think at the end of this deal, they're hoping that Fowler's ready to play anyway. So like 3 years from now, right? Like you're hoping that Fowler's at least ready to be a like 1B kind of goalie. So like they're set up really well in net, and they have no money tied up into it because like Montembeault could fall off a cliff next year, and it doesn't really hurt them because they don't have him locked up to like a crazy like Vejmelka contract. And like that's really good. And I think as long as they avoid doing that on his next deal, then they're fine. They could sign him another one of these little bridge deals and just have him be a tandem with presumably Fowler at that point. Like I'd be okay with that as long as his numbers are relatively the same level. But I think there's something to be said about how the Canadians have handled this goaltending thing, despite the fact that Jake Allen looks really good in New Jersey. It was time to move on from him anyway.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but like I think that it was like this the way that the goaltending is set up right now in Montreal looks very good and should be very helpful in kind of pushing this rebuild forward. And obviously they took a big step this year. And I think you got to kind of hope that they're a bona fide playoff team next year. I think that's kind of got to be the logical projection. Whether or not they get in this season kind of is irrelevant at this point to the rebuild. This has been a successful year regardless. But just based on that projection, I think the Canadians look like the outlook in Montreal is really good. And a lot of it has to do with how underrated Montembeault's been, especially in a market like Montreal that would presumably overrate him. And that really hasn't happened. So that's kind of an X factor to me when it comes to how this East playoff race falls out.
Yeah. I think too, which is really interesting, something I think they could explore if you believe that Fowler would be ready maybe around this time of year next year. If you're able to flip Sam Montembeault and Fowler's ready for an NHL job, he would have the following season under contract. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one of those multi-year trade deadline acquisitions you're looking at. And if you can
Yeah.
retain 50% of that, that could be a really nice haul for Montreal if they decide, because
Oh yeah.
he'll be 29 at this point next year. So
Yeah.
you're looking at a 29-year-old goalie at 50% retained, making $1.5 million. That's locked up for your playoff run at that price. And for the following
Another
year, I
year.
think a team that needs a goalie, this could be really interesting. But it all depends on Dustin Fowler, of course.
Yeah. I don't know. That might be a little early to pull the trigger on a Montembeault trade for me. It might be more of a the summer before his last year that they can do that. Because at least you give Fowler the entire year to kind of prove it. And especially if Montreal's pushing for a playoff spot, I'd rather just run with both of them and have the option to go back if you need to. But it definitely opens the door for a lot of really interesting possibilities. And as long as the Canadians can kind of manage their cap really well, and based on the contracts they've handed out so far, uh, aside from the decision to sign Jake Evans, I think that, and even that wasn't a bad contract. I just don't necessarily agree with the methodology behind it. Um, they've done a really good job like locking up these players for very team friendly deals, especially with the cap going up. Like these contracts look even better now that we know the cap's going to go up to like $100 million in like 3 years. Like their entire core is signed long term, and aside from Demidov, obviously, and Hudson, but they've given themselves the flexibility to sign those deals. And everybody else basically is making team friendly contracts, especially if Caulfield gets close to 50 this year, and he'll break 40. Barring a crazy collapse in the last 15 games. So that's kind of the benchmark there. But like already, I mean, that line's looked really good too for the Canadians. So the one thing that bothers me for them going back to the playoff race is the fact that they really only have one line going. There's not much else offensively in Montreal besides how good the Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slafkovsky line's been. But despite the fact that Line is like close-ish to a point a game, he's hasn't really done much else, and the depth in Montreal isn't great in terms of secondary scoring yet. But again, they have players coming up. Like that's not a concern I have long term. It's just if this team's trying to make the playoffs this year, that's kind of a worry to me. But what's your pick for the wild card? I don't know if you mentioned that.
For the wild card, I'm gonna say it's gonna be Ottawa, and I'm also gonna say that the Rangers get it.
Yeah, I think the Rangers are kind of the safe bet. That's probably who I'd put money on in this, but I think everybody's kind of rooting for Columbus, even if like you don't like the Blue Jackets. The story in Columbus would be really fun if they get in. But I just don't know if, especially with the collapse they've had on the power, like their power play numbers have been abysmal. They've allowed they've scored one more power play goal than they've allowed shorthanded goals in the last 24 games. Like that's not good. I got I posted a graphic about their penalty about the power play. I got the expected goals wrong. I put 61.11. It's supposed to be 81.11. But even that is easily the league worst in that time frame. And losing Sean Monahan has really kind of hurt them, which is unfortunate because Sean Monahan, first of all, has been a big catalyst for the push that the Blue Jackets have had, and he's primed to be a huge regression candidate next year. So it's kind of unfortunate that he's missing out on the end of the season. And hopefully he can come back soon and help turn things around in Columbus. But I don't know if you have any other pressing things that you want to talk about, but that's kind of the playoff race in both conferences. I think it's fascinating. This has been one of the better wildcard races I think we've had in a while, despite the fact that the West is kind of starting to take a bit more shape, but even then it's pretty close. So there's a lot of young teams too. I think that's the big thing here too, is that there's a lot of teams that are kind of taking that next step, pushing for these races, right? To have a team like Ottawa that hasn't made the playoffs in a while, Montreal, Columbus, Detroit, all kind of like younger and not in that big area yet. You have Calgary and Utah in the West. And I think that's really fun that there's a lot of these teams that have been bad for a couple years, trying to take that next step.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I think you're starting to see that gap close between those teams that have been on top for the last little while, teams that have been in the playoffs like the Islanders and the Bruins, and now you finally see those teams like Montreal, Ottawa, Columbus finally on the rise, showing that it is a long and painful journey, but you do get there eventually. So,
yeah.
And I think it's been a couple years as well since we've had this sort of very open playoff wild card race here. It feels like the past couple years it's just been very obvious at this point after the trade deadline, and I really like having some meaningful hockey here in the last 15 games.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wish that the NHL would get rid of the division playoff format. That's a whole other argument. It's not. I just don't. I'm not a fan at all. Of like playing within your division, and then the two.
I prefer 1 through 8.
Yeah, I think you can give the top 2 seeds to division winners if you want. You can make 1-2 your 2 division winners. Fine. Give a reward for winning your division. They can play 8, 7, 8. That's fine. But like the fact that the Colorado Avalanche are going to finish 4th in the West, and this isn't just like a matchup thing. It's not like I don't want to see Dallas and Colorado playing around one because they're both contenders and like they should play later in the playoffs because like upsets can happen. That's fine. But from a financial standpoint, the Avalanche are going to finish in the top 4 in the conference, and instead of hosting a playoff series, they're going to have to go on the road to Dallas. It just doesn't make any sense. Like they shouldn't be punished for being a top 4 seed in your conference. Like it stresses me out. I don't like it. I think it doesn't make sense financially. I don't know why owners haven't figured out that it doesn't make sense financially yet, but maybe they will one day. And you have even conferences. You can do it. I believe in you. But that's fine. It's okay. But we get to see LA and Edmonton for the 5th straight year in a row. So cool. So that's all we got for you this week. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Remember you can listen on Apple, Spotify. We have full videos on YouTube. We have the Instagram. Go follow all that. And we'll see you guys next week. Playoff race heating up. And it's a really fun time of the year. March Madness. There you go. See you guys next week.